This is the book of Romans, chapter 15, verse 4. And it says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime, were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and the comfort of the scriptures, might have hope." Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. Giving all honor, all praises, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash, that honors the apostles and elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I don't really have essentially a title, but I wanted to go through this video, or comment, I should say, on this video that's been circulating in regards to certain men, wanting to make more money, and pretty much, wanted to take essentially a spiritual outlook upon, that sort of mindset, because when it comes to the nature of our people, their thing is to acquire more money, but there is essentially no spiritual aspect, to it, right? And we know of obviously that, but if you don't know, the money that we use does not essentially have any intrinsic value, but at the same time, with our, exhibiting certain fruits of the spirit, as the Apostle Paul spoke of, you can use the carnal riches to, exemplify fruits of the spirit and acquire spiritual riches, right? So I wanted to read through, this story, because this story really stuck to me in regards to this individual here. When I say individual, there's a video circulating in regards to, two brothers. They're speaking a lot on their carnal, essentially, pursuits, right? And essentially disregarding the spiritual aspect, right? So I kind of wanted to go through this story here in regards to Nabal and Abigail, right? And I kind of wanted to read through, a man who had a lot of substance, and this is what he actually did with the substance, because a lot of our people, they want a lot of this money, but it's normally to essentially indulge, in a lot of carnal pursuits, but they don't see essentially the spiritual aspect of it. And this is what I wanted to cover today, with this particular lesson, in regards to somebody who had a lot of substance, but what did they do? They had an opportunity to exemplify spiritual riches, but they didn't capitalize upon it, right? So this is not to say that money is acquiring more money in a righteous sense. Working for it is a bad thing. The only problem is that our people forget the spiritual aspect of what they can do with that money they acquire, and because those things are not in the back of their minds. And then secondly, we know that we know that we store our treasures in heaven, because in these times we understand that the money that we use, it's going to profit us very little in times to come, right? Especially in times of Jacob's trouble, and we're pretty much going to need an advocate in the heavens to be able to defend us, right? Because the scriptures talk about how, my servants shall eat, right? So anyways, before I ramble on too long, I wanted to just go through this story here in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and then hopefully, hopefully this lesson will be edifying, right? So this is 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 2, and it says, "And there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And the name of the man was Nabal, and his wife Abigail. Now she was a woman of good understanding, beautiful countenance, but the man was very churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb," right? So, before I continue, let's get that word churlish. just to get more understanding of what that word means. It says, rude in a mean-spirited and surly way. It says here, resembling, let's get into the etymology. Just give me 1 second here. So churlish, deliberately rude, sullen, surly. Let's see what a churl is. A churl is someone who is a peasant or a lower class of freeman, a man without rank, a free man of low degree, right? So let's see if there's any more. So essentially a person who's very, very ill-mannered, unfriendly, and unpleasant, right? So this is the type of person Nabal was, right? So just keep in mind that he had a lot of substance, right? So this is verse 4, and it says, and David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. And David sent out 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And it says, and thus shall ye say to him that live in prosperity, peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shears. Now thy shepherds, which were with us, we hurt them not. Neither was there aught missing unto them. All the while they were in Carmel. Ask the young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes. For we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh unto thine hand, unto thine servants, and thy son David. And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all the words in the name of David, and ceased, right? So David sends out a couple men to go see this man that has a lot of substance, right? Go greet these men in my name. This is my name is David, from the house of Jesse, right? So just to get an idea of what's actually occurring here. And this is Nabal's response. So Nabal responds to David's servants, and it says, and Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed from my shearers and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? Now David's young men turned their way and went again, and came and told him all those sayings. So essentially, Nabal had a certain type of attitude where, okay, I'm not gonna give my substance unto these men. I don't know who these men are. I don't know this guy, this son of Jesse, this guy, he could be anybody. I don't know this Jesse or anything like that. Because remember, in the ancient times, a person's, name had a lot of weight and reputation, right? It wasn't just something like, people kind of just messed around with. It was a name that held, it had a certain level of weight. For brothers who have seen the show, there's a show I used to watch called Game of Thrones, right? And, there was this one family known as the Lannister family, and there's this one character that he always had a saying. He always said, a Lannister always pays his debts, right? So he came from a certain family. They were just very, very well known for paying off debts. They had a very good reputation, right? So just to give an idea of what's actually occurring here, and Nabal, his mindset was, okay, I'm just going to fan my hand. I'm not going to help any of these servants, and give my substance. I have a lot of substance. Who do these men think they are, right? Kind of skinning up his teeth, right? Just to get an idea of what's actually occurring here, right? So this is verse 13, and it says, and David said unto these young men, gird ye, on every man his sword. And they girded every man his sword, and David also girded his sword, and went up after David about 400 men, right? So this is a lot more men that he right? And 200 abode by, the stuff. But the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers out in the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them, but the men were very good to us. So essentially they had a good reputation, and they were not hurt, neither missed we anything, as long as we were conversant with them. When we were in the fields, they were a wall unto us both night and day, and all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore, now consider what thou wilt do, for evil determined against our master and against all his household. He is the son of Belial, that man cannot speak unto him. Right? So David was now in a, he's a man of war, right? So now he's in a warlike mindset. He wants to mess this guy up, right? So I'll read verse 18 just for more understanding, right? But I kind of wanted to touch more upon, what Nabal did, or rather, I should say, what he failed to do, with the substance that he had. And I'm going to get that in a second. But I just wanted to get an understanding of, what Nabal did, and this is what Abigail did. It says, and Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 200 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses, right? So, she prepared some substance for David and his men, right? So, let's get the spiritual aspect of what actually, what could have Nabal actually have done differently, right? Because, and I'm saying this to say that, the young men, wishing, they want to be able to make, $120,000, right? They may not actually have a spiritual understanding of having that much substance and what you can do with that type of substance, right? So, this is, just bear with me, hold on. This is Sirach chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, when thou wilt do good, known to whom thou doest it, so shalt thou be thanked for thy benefits. Do good to the godly man, and thou shalt find a recompense, if not from him, yet from the Most High. Verse 3. There can no good come to him that is always occupied in evil, nor giveth no alms, right? So this is the type of mindset, okay, this is what Nabal should have done, with the substance that he had. He kind of basically fanned his hand at David's servants, right? And he could have actually had the opportunity to help David, in his moment, of distress, needing substance, right? But so just to show you the difference in the character between Nabal and between the wife Abigail, right? The woman was actually, very, very virtuous. She was very righteous for actually helping these men, right? But Nabal here having a lot of substance, and this is the aspect of a lot of our people. They acquire a lot of substance, but they don't actually consider, okay, maybe this substance, I can lose it, and I can actually use this substance to, have, acquire spiritual riches, right? Because remember how, like for example, in the book of Tobit, the good things that he did, essentially was remembered, and then Tobit got that recompense, essentially, where he was able, to see again. Right, so it shows you that the Lord can remember and recompense you, using the spiritual aspect of the substance that you have, right? Rather than being like what what Nabal did, the husband here did, kind of just fanning his hand basically, right? So, pretty much, I just wanted to, discuss the spiritual aspect because a lot of our people, they might want a lot of these things, right? And money, as the scriptures say, is also a defense, right? Our people just disregard the spiritual aspect and the fruits of the spirit, so let me hold on, just bear with me 1 second. This is Colossians 3:12, and it says in the AMP, and so the Most High's chosen people who are holy and set apart, sanctified for his purpose, and well beloved by the Most High himself, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, which has the power to endure whatever injustice and unpleasantness comes with good temper, bearing graciously with one another and willing to forgive one another if one has a complaint against another, just as the Lord has forgiven you, you should also forgive, right? So just, a lot of our people, you might be in a situation where you might have a lot of substance, right? And a lot of these men that, they want a lot of these carnal things, they actually fail to they disregard these particular traits, because these traits are also very very healthy, for development, for character, development, because when you think about it, in the nature of this society is really just to acquire and share, because when you go into our culture, our mindset and a lot of the laws that we practice, they were laws that actually were to actually keep in mind those who are not what's the word I'm looking for, who were less fortunate. So for example, the laws on gleaning grapes, it really does teach you to essentially be considerate. And I say that because if you were an Israelite back then, who had a lot of substance, right? Because the different tribes had received the different substance as opposed to the tribe of Levi, if you had, your different substance, like say, for example, you had a vineyard, you're not going to glean all the different portions of the vineyard, right? You would leave a little bit there for, children that were orphans, for widows that, okay, they may have lost their husbands, for, Israelites that were sojourning in the land and they needed something to eat. That was it's a law, yes, but it's a law that forces us as a nation to actually maintain and understand the welfare of those who didn't have that substance, right? So you really and truly you exemplify, being, essentially being considerate, right? It wasn't just that you didn't have we weren't supposed to be a bunch of niggards, basically, right? And that's kind of one of the aspects I really wanted to cover, with this particular lesson, with these individuals. They may pray for, and want a lot of this money, right? But, look at the state and the welfare, of the society and the way it's going, right? And again, this is not to disregard the importance of having money, but this is also just to shed a light on the spiritual aspect of using the substance that you have, right? Let me see here. Oh, let's go to that account here. This is Mark chapter 12 verse 41, and it says, and Yahushua sat against the treasury, and behold how the rich people cast in money into the treasury, and there were many rich that cast in much. And then there was a certain poor widow that threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto his disciples and said unto them, Yahushua speaking, verily say unto you that this poor widow hath cast in more in all than all they which have cast in the treasury, for they all did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Right? So just to show the contrast between, this widow here, not even having a lot of the substance that the ball had, but yet for all, she casted in all of her living. So she had a strong sentiment of faith, right? So she had a very, very righteous spirit, as opposed to Nabal, who had a lot of substance, right? So that's pretty much it. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but this is really just an exhortation in regards to, as a matter of fact, I'll end off with this last precept, because this one is kind of fitting to the times. This is Proverbs chapter 11, verse 4, and it says, riches profit not in a day of wrath, but righteousness delivereth from death, right? So, our people's mindset is, this money and so on and so forth. While, it is a defense, right, as the scriptures say, but, the priorities is not, money, right? Our priorities is to have a kingdom that is actually set up, and governed in righteousness, right? So, anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, as always, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashmel Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.